Let's start by stripping UBI of its warm, fuzzy exterior. Universal Basic Income. The full name sounds almost tender, like a social safety net woven from good intentions. But when you pull off that sentimental packaging, and here's what's underneath: a carbon-based maintenance fee. And the reason anyone's seriously proposing a carbon-based maintenance fee is even less flattering. Social stability insurance. It's not unemployment benefits, not a pension, not charity. Everyone gets it. No means test, no application, no humiliation ritual at a government office. It sounds like a scam, but it's actually the most serious social experiment of our era. Some call it the first step toward utopia. Others call it humanity's final consolation prize. In 2016, Switzerland became the first country to put this to a national vote. The government asked its citizens one apparently humanitarian question: should we give every adult an unconditional 2,500 francs per month? Over 70% said no. The experts analyzed it to death. Fear of freeloaders, tax implosion, migration surges, systemic collapse. But the answer that actually cuts deepest was much simpler. Why should they get what I had to earn? We talk endlessly about equality, but what actually activates our nervous system isn't someone else suffering. It's someone else getting the same thing without suffering the same way. Now, Elon Musk recently suggested we are thinking too small. Not universal basic income, survival money, floor-level dignity. Universal high income, abundance, not just enough, plenty. He also mentioned the road will be bumpy. That word, bumpy, it's doing a lot of quiet work in that sentence. The bumpiness will be physical. Yes, markets, jobs, entire industries restructuring. We know how to talk about that kind. What we don't have language for is the other kind. The correlation between a system built entirely on the logic of earning and a future where earning is no longer the point. Switzerland voted against UBI in peacetime, in prosperity with the math working. So when UBI or UHI arrives, not as a proposal, but as the only remaining option, what exactly do we think is going to happen? Countries have already run this experiment. The results are instructive, not because they prove the UBI works or doesn't work, but because of the question they couldn't answer. Finland tried it for 2 years. The result was quite encouraging. Psychological well-being improved. People didn't stop working. The government discontinued it anyway. But here's what 2 years can't measure. The immediate relief of not scrambling is real. Nobody's disputing that. The first chapter of freedom from survival pressure probably does feel like breathing out. The question is what happens in chapter 2? When the relief settles, when the structure that gave your days shape, the job, the obligation, the thing you had to show up for, isn't temporarily lifted, but permanently gone. Not just for you, for everyone around you simultaneously. Every trial measured the exhale. Nobody's run the experiment long enough to measure what comes after it. Canada got further. Then a new government looked at the budget and said, too expensive. Goodbye. Switzerland voted down repeatedly. Their own explanation was the most revealing. a failure of trust in human nature. The cultural resistance tells its own story. America's entire national mythology is individual ascent, the self-made arc, the idea that your circumstances are your own fault or your own achievement, collapses the moment you admit the system might just give people things. UBI isn't just an economic proposal in the American context. It's a death certificate for a national religion. For Germany, Japan, and Korea, UBI is legislation of laziness. The cultural immune system rejects it even as aging crises make it structurally necessary. As for the most developing nations, the word unconditional makes finance minister physically ill. Not unwilling, just structurally incapable. The cruelest irony is that places that need it most can implement it, while the places that need it the least are the only ones positioned to try. So the obstacle to UBI was never purely fiscal. And UHI, Musk's vision, not a floor but a ceiling removed entirely, doesn't solve the deeper problem. It accelerates it. If UBI's unanswered question is, what do I do with the exhale? And UHI's is, what do I do when there's no reason to breathe differently at all? The first is disorienting. The second is existential. And we've never run that experiment. Let's take Musk at his words. AI builds, optimizes, and allocates. UHI arrives. Maybe currency itself becomes unnecessary, as he suggests. Everyone has everything they physically need and materially want. So, now what? Musk's framing assumes that problem was always scarcity. Remove scarcity, remove the problem. But the economic trials only answered the economic questions. They couldn't answer the one underneath. Poverty can be solved by abundance. Relative position cannot. And relative position is what actually drives human suffering at scale. Economists have been watching this for decades. Richard Easterling identified it in the 1970s. Beyond a certain threshold, richer society aren't proportionally happier. Because happiness isn't absolute, it's relative. We don't measure our lives against what we have. We measure them against what everyone around us has. We can have everything we materially need and still feel the specific, corrosive pain of watching someone have more. In a world with infinite content, infinite visibility, and algorithmic comparison engine running 24/7, less than is the only suffering that scales without limit. Musk's UHI solves having nothing. It doesn't solve being less than someone else. Here's the assumption buried inside. Everyone gets everything they want. That never gets examined. That whatever you want is a fixed target. It isn't. Wants are not absolute. They're precisional. They inflate with the ceiling. The moment everyone has everything materially available, the definition of want migrates immediately upward to whatever remains scarce. And under UHI, the things that remain scarce are exactly the things that money alone was never able to buy. Biological advantage, social proximity to power, the feeling of being exceptional rather than equivalent. A life that looks meaningful different from everyone else's UHI life. History is consistent on this. Every time a basic need gets solved at scale, food security, sanitation, mass literacy, mass entertainment, humans don't stop wanting. They reorganize their desires around the next tier of scarcity. Give everyone a house. We want the better house. Give everyone health care. We want the better doctor. Give everyone UHI. We want the life that signals something, anything, that abundance alone can distribute equally. Musk's UHI solve absolute deprivation. It cannot solve relative deprivation, because relative deprivation is a human architecture problem. We are comparison machines. It's how we navigate status, safety, and belonging. No income level patches it. No abundance ceiling reaches it. The suffering doesn't disappear under UHI. It upgrades. And there's a second problem, quieter but deeper. Whatever you want assumes we know what we want. We don't. Not when the structure that shaped our wanting disappears. Most of what we want is socially constructed. We want things because others want them, because earning them signals something, because the pursuit itself gives life a shape. The wanting isn't just about destination. It's about having somewhere to move toward. Remove the necessity of pursuit, and wants don't clarify, they fragment. We don't suddenly discover our true desires when scarcity lifts. We discover we don't know what our desires are without the scaffolding of scarcity to organize them. This is Finland's Chapter 2. Except under UHI, there's no going back to Chapter 1. Under UBI, we have enough, but not everything. The residual structure of wanting more still functions. The gap between where we are and where we could be still gives desire a direction. Under UHI, you have everything. And everything, it turns out, is a horizon with nothing on the other side. So, if abundance can solve relative deprivation, and desire loses its map without scarcity to organize it, what happens to the structures we build around the logic of wanting more? Two of them collapse first, and they collapse together. Right now, effort still has a door, narrow, unevenly distributed, increasingly hard to find, but technically open. The stories are real even if they are rare. The first generation graduate, the immigrant who built something, the person who outworked their starting point. We tell those stories obsessively, probably because we need them to be true. UHI doesn't just make that door harder to find. It closes it, locks it, removes it from the architecture entirely, because when effort is no longer economically necessary, it also stops being socially legible as a path to anything. Individual effort stops being the mechanism. Origin becomes permanent. But one ancient mobility channel survives, and this is where it gets complicated. Marriage. If you can earn your way into a different class, you might still be able to marry into one. That mechanism is older than capitalism and has survived every economic disruption so far. Under UHI, it might become more strategic, not less, for the people who wish the most to gain from it. Except that there's a variable that makes even this ladder narrower with every passing decades. Access to advanced biotechnology, gene editing, cognitive and physical enhancement available to those who can afford it. We're not in science fiction territory here. The CRISPR debate is already in policy paper. The question of enhancement beyond disease prevention into trait selection is already being asked seriously in bioethics and governance circles. The upper class isn't just accumulating wealth and assets across generations. They're beginning to accumulate biological capital, which means the distance between classes stops being purely economic. It becomes embodied, heritable, visible. Marrying up doesn't disappear as a strategy. It just becomes exponentially harder because the person you're trying to marry up to is increasingly a different category of human, not just a different tax bracket. The ladder doesn't vanish, it gets narrower, and the rungs get further apart every generation. We don't have to imagine what happens when economic floor rises and the dependency on partnership softens. The early vision is already running. As women have gained real economic independence over the past few decades, something measurable happened. Marriage rates dropped. Single-person households became the fastest-growing demographic in developed economies. People stopped forming domestic arrangements they don't genuinely choose. This isn't only a values shift. It's a structural response to a structural change. Economic necessity was always part of the adhesive holding family together. Not the only part, but a load-bearing part. Remove it gradually and watch what loosens. UHI completes this process. What's been happening slowly over generations as economic dependency on partnership softened happens all at once when UHI arrives and everyone's dependency dissolves simultaneously. The family was never primarily a romantic arrangement. I know, it's uncomfortable, but the architecture was always there. Who is the economic anchor? Who handles domestic labor and childcare? Whose career gets prioritized when the family has to choose? Who decides whether we move, change cities, change lives? Underneath the warmth is a productive unit, organized around labor, not equal, not free, but stable, legible, and held together by mutual necessity. Remove the necessity, and the question that was always underneath surface. Do I actually want this? Or did I just need it? For some, it's liberating. Living arrangements that only survived because living was too expensive. Stop the performance of a life built around someone else's requirements. For others, it's disorienting. The people who organized their entire identity around being needed, provider, caretaker, the one the household couldn't function without, remove the function, and there's no self waiting underneath. Just one question: who was I when nobody's needed me? And for the generation growing up inside this, children in a world where work doesn't define you, where destiny is largely visible from birth, the randomness made striving feel meaningful disappears. And a companionship is available from an AI that never disappoints, never needs anything, never asks you to be different. What do the words commitment and family even mean? Will they want households, or will they find it simpler and honestly more reliable to not? When nothing is required, connection is reduced to want. Maybe that's more honest than arrangements built on necessity. or maybe want without structure. It's just a slower kind of alone. The women's independency trend tells us which way it goes when the economic floor rises. UHI just finishes the sentence. And underneath both collapses runs the same logic we already identified. The one's abundance was never going to solve. Biological advantage, social proximity to power, the feeling of being exceptional. Under UHI, the things that compound across generations are exactly the things no income level reaches. The game doesn't end. It just stops accepting new players. And the wanting doesn't stop either. It just loses its map. Yes, AI hasn't fully taken over. Neither UBI nor UHI has arrived. But meaning erosion, identity fragmentation, romantic relationships quietly losing their reason to exist. We already know this. We are already living them. We are still working. But most of us stopped believing effort changed outcomes a while ago. We are still forming relationships. But plenty of people have quietly reclassified family as a high-risk investment. We are still chasing growth. But the growth keeps delivering the pain of a wellness without the pleasure of transformation. These fractures are already here. But right now, because survival pressure keeps us too busy to fully feel them, the scramble is exhausting, but it's also organizing. It gives the day a shape. It gives the relationship a reason. AI, UBI, and UHI don't just reveal these cracks. They will remove the loud noise that was covering them all at once, for everyone, with no going back. The old pen was, I can't. The new pen will be, I don't know why I'm still not okay. UHI may sound like science fiction, but the psychological transition it demands of us is already being asked, quietly, incrementally, by the world we're living in right now. The atmosphere is already shifting, slowly enough that we can still pretend it isn't. Quickly enough that the people who aren't thinking about it now will be blindsided by it later. So ask yourself now, if I no longer have to prove myself to survive, how actually do I want to live?